Okay, so I'm going to be going over the videos from this week. The first video was informative versus persuasive speeches. An informative speech is meant to inform an audience about a certain topic, and in an informative speech, there are three main points that each have supporting material and are structured in a chronological sequence, so it is easy for the audience to logically go from one, or the speaker to logically go from one point or another, so the audience can can easily comprehend the information that's being told to them. But in a persuasive speech, the purpose is to change the audience's minds about a certain topic, and it's all about building an argument. And while the argument is based on facts, it is again meant to persuade and not inform. And instead of having the chronological structure of the informative speeches, it is more of a problem and solution structure where a problem is presented and a solution is proposed, and the goal of the speech is to persuade the audience into believing that this is a good solution to said problem. And when giving a persuasive speech, it is important that the message fits the audience, the goals of the speaker, and the audience as well, and also the occasion in which the speech is being given. And then the next video is how to organize a persuasive speech. In an introduction, there is the attention grabber, there is audience relevance established, so the audience knows why they should care. Then there is the main point or thesis of the persuasive speech, and then there is a preview of the speech, which emphasizes a problem and implies a solution to that problem. And then in the body of the speech, instead of having the three chronological main points of an informative speech, it is set up as a problem, solution, and benefit structure. So you establish the problem, you propose a solution, and then you give the benefits of the solution. And then in the conclusion, you signal the end of the speech. You give a key takeaway for your audience so they know what they should be getting out of it. And then there is the call to action, so the audience takes initiative. And then of course, all speeches should typically end with the clincher, so the speech has a lasting impact in the minds of the audience once the speech is concluded. And then the next video was about what persuasion is. Persuasion is using a spoken or written message to change a person's beliefs or attitudes. And in a persuasive speech, a speaker shares a message to persuade their audience. And it's important to remember that persuasion is not forcing beliefs onto an audience, because their autonomy should be respected. That it should be respected that they can form their own thoughts and opinions and think for themselves. Persuasion is also not lying or manipulating, because that is just incredibly unethical. And it's also important to remember that persuasion is not preaching to the choir, because nothing is really being accomplished. Instead of changing someone's mind with your speech, you're more so just contributing to an echo chamber. And then the next video was Monroe's motivational sequence. The 5 steps that were outlined in that sequence were grabbing the audience's attention, showing the need, which is important because it's establishing why you're giving the speech in the first place, and then showing the solution or satisfaction to that need. This is what you're trying to convince your audience on. And then there is helping visualize the situation, which is the process that which is what you're using to persuade your audience. And then there is the call to action, which is getting your audience to take initiative. And it is important to be ethical in your speech. It's important to have the listener's best interests in mind, and also to support their ability to have free choice, and also to just be genuine and factual in your speech. And then the next one was how to be more persuasive. The first steps that were shown the first tips that were given were to learn about your audience and occasion before drafting your speech. So because if a speech is relevant to an audience and occasion, it's easier to get your audience on board with what your point is. And then of course decide what you want for your audience, what you want them to get out of your speech. And then it is important to appeal to their rational side, so it makes sense to them. It appeals to their emotions, so they feel inclined to, because if you appeal to their emotions, it appeals to their human side, and would easily get, it would make it easier for you to convince the audience on your main point. And then, of course, there is establishing credibility, which is just it's something that's necessary in all speeches. So it gives you some kind of authority on the topic you're speaking of. And these all have different names. Appealing to the rational side is logos, appealing to emotions is pathos, and establishing credibility is ethos. And then the next video was how to structure a persuasive speech. The introduction is very similar to an informative speech, where it is, as far as structure goes anyway, because there is the attention grabber, there's audience relevance, there's credibility that's established, there's a main point, but the body is where it changes, because instead, as mentioned earlier, instead of having the chronological structure, it's more of a problem, solution, and benefit. So instead of it being a chronological structure of facts, it is more of a plan to eliminate a problem and also outline the benefits of said problem. So you start with the problem or the need, the solution or plan that you're proposing, and the benefits or visualization of your solution, which are meant to get the audience on board with your solution or plan. And then the conclusion signals the end, reinforces the bottom line of your speech. It recaps the main points. It establishes a call to action for the audience and ends with a clincher. The next one is a second part to the structure video, the previous one. This one just outlines different ways that a body can be structured in a persuasive speech. The first one that was shown was a 2-point structure where it's just a problem and solution, where the benefits are left out, but it's important to recognize that benefits should only be left out if they're just obvious to the audience. And if the body does only have a problem and solution, those points need to be incredibly fleshed out and well developed, because that's going to be the meat of the speech. The next structure was problem, cause, and solution, where instead of establishing a problem and solution and the benefits, you establish the problem, then you establish the cause of the problem, so why the problem is, or why the problem exists to begin with, and then you propose the solution. And then the next one, this is more often used in clinical terms, but it can also be used for other types of businesses, but it's often used when addressing medical ailments. So there is a problem, which could be the symptoms, the cause, which is the illness that is causing said symptoms or condition that's causing symptoms, and then there are the treatments, which are the medical procedures or the medications that are used to treat the illness or ailment that the patient has. And then the next video was just listing different calls to action. There is a QR code as the first one that was listed. This is just something that people can scan, since technology is a huge part of our society. There are QR codes that are often supplied at the end of a speech that link or redirect the audience member to a website for more information or something similar to that effect. Then the next one is a freebie exchange, where in exchange for the audience's email, they receive something like a workbook or a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that was used in the speech, for just like a recap in case they want to go back and look at the presentation that was given and look at the points. Then the next one was physical giveaway. So this could be something like a postcard or a pamphlet, so it's something physical that the audience member can take home instead of it being like a digital file. Then there is a newsletter that the audience members could subscribe to. It's often nowadays a email sort of thing, but in some cases they do give out physical newsletters. Then another one is consultation. There are often times where a speaker will offer a free one-time consultation afterwards. And then the next two ones sort of go hand in hand. There is donations and support. Donations are, of course, more often than not, they're financial donations. So it's like giving money to the cause that the speaker is giving their speech for, or just general support. So spreading their message through social media or things like that, where it's encouraged, or general support is just encouraged. And then of course there's making a commitment to, there's the speaker using a commitment call to action for the audience so they can make a commitment to themselves after listening to the speech. Then there is a small symbolic action where it could, this is something where the audience doesn't really have to do a whole lot. It could just be like a small sort of thing. Like say that the speaker is giving a speech about climate change, and this small symbolic action could be just keep turning your lights off when you're not using them. So it's something small, but it means something. And then of course there's inviting a conversation after the speech. This is a more direct approach, but it could encourage the audience to further engage with the speaker even after the speech is concluded. And then the next one was how to appeal to listeners' hearts and minds. For appealing to listeners' hearts, there are stories which are often specific and help paint a picture or a more vivid picture to the audience. And because they have a better picture of the story that's being told, it's easier for it to appeal to their emotions. And then there are real life examples which appeal to the audience's emotions because it's coming from a personal place instead of it just being something that they just made up in their head. There's also vivid language, which helps the audience picture what you're speaking about in their head. As mentioned earlier, it helps them connect more with what you're saying. And then of course there are powerful quotes, and these are used because oftentimes if you have a quote that can just like sum up your message in one sentence, it sticks with the audience and it resonates with them. And then for appealing to their minds, there are facts and statistics, just cold hard facts and numbers that make the point more specific and believable to the audiences. And then you can also use quotes again, but instead of it being a quote that appeals to emotions, it's something from an expert that makes the argument more credible. And then of course if there's any other hard evidence like photos or research results, then those can also be included. But it's also really important that you don't just stick to one or the other. It's important that you use both facts and it's important that you appeal to both their sense of logic and reasoning and also their emotions, because if you just stick to one, it sort of just it doesn't resonate as much, because if you're just using logic and facts, then it sort of just grows stale in the person's mind. But if you appeal to their emotions too much, it makes it feel like you're just saying things to get them to just to feel things, and it's almost like a form of emotional manipulation.